Good afternoon. No, I'm teasing.
Yeah.
But welcome to this kickoff. I'm very excited to be doing this. The intent is to have just very informative, enjoyable, just different kinds of seminars than we usually have. And I am very, very pleased that that Don Parfet has agreed to be the kickoff presenter to talk about the Upjohn family legacy and the W.E. Upjohn Institute. So I'm just going to take a minute to introduce Don. I cleared the bio with him, so he said it was okay. Don received his BA degree in economics from the University of Arizona in '75 and his MBA in finance from the University of Michigan. Go Blue. I know that now. Sorry. In 1977, Don loves Michigan State, so go Green. Don is a retired executive from Pharmacia, having worked for many years with two legacy companies, as you'll hear about, the Upjohn Company and Pharmacia in Upjohn. He has over 30 years of experience in all aspects of life science businesses. He's launched businesses, launches, management, and exit. I should have practiced that. I'm sorry. It is his vision to launch the. It was his vision to launch the Upjohn Group in 2001, and I think we're going to hear about the origin of that name, Upjohn, to bring talent and seed capital together to exploit the biotech opportunities in the Midwest region. In addition to his duties with the Upjohn Group, he is trustee and the chair of the board of the W.E. Upjohn Institute for Employment Research, and also the trustee and past chairman of the board of the Bronson Healthcare Group, and trustee and past board chair of Kalamazoo College. He also serves as a board member of Kelly Services, and we've talked a lot about that in terms of data, Masco Corp, Rockwell Automation, and that is a full resume. So Don has said he doesn't know how long the talk will last. I said, that's fine. This is our kickoff. It's an experiment. So without further ado, I think it'll just be a nice informal session. I am delighted that you are here. Welcome to Don Parfet.
Mike, thank you. Everyone who's assembled here, good to see you. I was pretty excited when I saw all the cars in the parking lot when I pulled in today. This day has been a long time in coming. As Mike said, I'm Don Parfet. I've been a trustee of the Institute now for 28 years and currently have the privilege to serve as its board chair. Our founder, Dr. William Erastus Upjohn, often referred to as W.E. or Dr. Will, certainly lived an extraordinary life. W.E.'s last year of life coincided with some of the most severe times of the Great Depression. And he had been able to keep his own company solvent through the most severe economic downturn. And with his means and genuine concern for the well-being of others, he had acquired vast acreage of farmland and granted citizens from around the area that were impacted by the Depression, free access to the land to grow their own foods. Still, he needed to do more. So he rewrote his will to set aside shares of his company in a trust to provide funding for further initiatives to provide relief from the effects of such man-made catastrophes as that Great Depression. And at the depth of the Depression, the unemployment rate exceeded 20% and had very crippling effects on the entire economy and made each day an unimaginable crisis for millions of Americans. This talk will explore what made this man, who he was, and what he accomplished. And out of deference to his English roots, I will present whence he came. I will rely heavily upon works of my mother, Martha Gilmore Parfet, who co-authored with Mary Corcoran their book, Keep the Quality Up, in 2014. And I'll also cite works found in another ancestral study, a family history authored by my mother's first cousin, Dr. Richard Upjohn Light, and published in 1990. Both books are really good reference books and can be found in the Institute's library. Soon, another book has been undertaken and will be published by Tim Light, Dr. Light's son, and with the valued assistance of Mary Corcoran Bechtel, who's now married. She will provide, both Tim and Mary will provide our family an even deeper study into the vastness of work and leisure of our many connected offspring of this large and energetic family. Okay. I've prepared a family genealogy. Okay. 15 generations of Upjohns are shown on this slide. There are handouts in the room, and I think, Laura, some handouts have been made available to those of you on the Zoom call. I encourage you to keep it close by if you wish to follow along. If you do not have a copy, I'll attempt to be clear in referencing what generation I'm talking about. But apologies to some cousins whose names may be left off the chart. But I thought I would keep the presentation as streamlined as possible. And furthermore, I didn't want to make any attempts to seek permission from anyone living on whether or not they could be cited in this presentation or accompanying materials. I know I'd only get about half of the answers. In viewing the genealogy, you may notice that the first Upjohn is spelled Apjohn. This Richard Upjohn spelled his name using the Welsh spelling for Upjohn, whereas the English would pronounce this spelling as Upjohn. The Welsh actually pronounce it as Upjohn. The word spelled as AP in the Welsh language means from. And joining AP with John creates son of or daughter of John. This Richard Upjohn died in 1579. Dr. Richard Upjohn Light from generation 12, you can see the numbers on the left side, who co-authored and wrote that one reference book I referenced, My Mother's Cousin. He was able to actually certify this generation 1 Richard Upjohn lineage from the official record of his probated will in Wiltshire, England. Furthermore, it was documented that his family, that Richard Upjohn from generation 1, that his family was from Wales. But no verification could be made of the names of his ancestors. Finding official records over 400 years old is nearly impossible anywhere, right? So this Richard is our first verifiable ancestor. We know too that he was a miller of grains, a trade he had learned in Wales. He was employed, no doubt, by a significant landowner in Wiltshire, an established county in England, just to the southeast of Wales. You can see too that the next 2 generations were also millers, as indicated by that parenthetical notation just to the left of the individual names. So this depiction, this display of the family genealogy does call out 3 significant professions: clockmakers, architects, and physicians. I intend to expand upon these 3 as I believe they will provide some great stories, but also a fair amount of inspiration to future generations. Okay. Slide 3. Here we see the millers and the masons mentioned. And but I draw you down to Thomas Upjohn, the fourth generation, the eldest son of another Richard Upjohn in the third generation. And Thomas moved his family. He married a woman from Shaftesbury and moved the family and started the family in the town of Shaftesbury. And that's a depiction of it on the right-hand side. From Gold Hill, it's called. It's quite an impressive view. And I'm told it is easily recognized throughout all of England. I've actually been there and it's breathtaking. The view from the top is, as I said, quite well known throughout England. Notably, you'll also see on the genealogy that the A in Upjohn has become a U. And I think it's most certainly they found it less confusing for Englishmen who had little understanding of the Welsh language. Okay, slide 4, the clockmakers. Edward Upjohn, generation 6, is shown on the long arm drawn to the right under the header, the clockmakers. And let me say that the break from this toiling of millers and masons must have suited Edward's aspirations well. Not only did he teach himself how to make clocks, but he moved his family to America in search of even greater fortune. He set up shop in Philadelphia in 1723 and later moved his works to Charleston, South Carolina, only to abandon the American dream and return to England. He found that there was more demand for his clocks in England than in America. And then he went about teaching his children, his sons, the art of clockmaking. And you can see there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of them that all became clockmakers. And furthermore, 6 generations of clockmakers who occupied a leading role in English clockmaking for over 160 years. Some of you may recognize 2 of the wall clocks, the 2 clocks shown in the middle of the bottom of this slide. These are owned here and displayed here at the Institute. The Institute also owns a long case clock that is outside of the Institute's boardroom. But the pocket watch on the right-hand side, that's mine. I bought that on eBay and paid about $400 for it. Wow. And it's really quite impressive in its size. It's no bigger than that. And it is also quite ornately decorated with this depiction of a woman, and that is a dagger in her hand. I have not studied why women were portrayed with daggers in their hand. Maybe some of you know. I don't recommend walking around town with a dagger. This is, there's no doubt in my mind that the success of this branch of the family tree was very inspiring to the remainder of the family. They could see that you could go to America, right? You could come back to England. If you had a trade, if you had an offering, you could do well. And the clockmakers did. very well. So further down that primary genealogy sheet in front of you is an arm drawn to the left. This identifies a grouping titled the Architects. And James Upjohn of Generation 8, born in 1765, is there at the head of it. He was a surveyor, a land agent, assisted his father-in-law with his tailoring business. He was a man of many skills. And at age 43, or his wife was 43, when she died of tuberculosis. And he moved his small family at that time to Newfoundland. But by 1812, he said, we need to go back. I don't know if it was the outbreak of a war. I don't know what the circumstances were, but they went back to Shaftesbury, and James indeed became the headmaster of the Blue Coat Academy in Shaftesbury, one of the prestigious schools, and he did remarry. But by 1830, all of his children, his 3 children, had migrated to America. And the youngest of which was Richard Upjohn, shown on Generation 9. He, his wife, and child migrated following his 5-year apprenticeship in carpentry. And working as a carpenter, Richard, working as a carpenter, Richard had really become quite a keen draftsman. And he could depict structures, he could depict carpentry, and drawing became a great strength of his. He had built a strong following among the wealthy lumber barons of Maine, building large mansions with strong Gothic features. And he was recognized also for a newly constructed Gothic-style Episcopal church of his design and construction in Bangor, Maine. And when the church pastor of Boston's Episcopal Church took over the parish of Trinity Church in New York City, Richard was asked to consult on the sagging roof. His consultation led to the shared understanding that the church needed to be demolished and a new Gothic-style church needed to be erected 9 feet to the north. 9 feet to the north. That was so it would line up perfectly with the top of Wall Street. And as shown on the left side of this slide is one of the most photographed churches in the world. And there at the head of Wall Street is Trinity Church, designed and built by Richard Upjohn. Now, Richard had a son, Richard M. Upjohn, in the Generation 10, born in 1828, and he followed into the family business at a young age of 18. And his son, so Richard M.'s son, Hobart, the 11th generation, joined after several years of working as a civil engineer. The building on the right of this slide is the state capitol of Connecticut, and it was designed by Richard M. Upjohn. Importantly, Richard the Elder, so the first Richard in this line of architects, was one of the founders of the American Institute of Architects and served as its first president from 1857 to 1876. With the goal of bringing ethics, bringing principle, and bringing certification to the profession of architecture. And significantly, his son afterwards his grandson, served as president of the New York chapter of the AIA. And Time Magazine had a great article on that once. Okay. This brings us to the physicians. So you follow the that large page at your table side, and you can see the arm that reaches out here with the physicians. Pictured here are Uriah and William, both generation 9, and both were raised in Shaftesbury until they were sent to America by their parents to find a better life than that being lived in the tumultuous England at the time. They were instructed to stay with their cousins, the architects, and to make a plan for the family to follow. Their warm welcome and conversations of careers with the cousins filled the men with ideas that needed to be explored and judged. And for the next 2 years, they traveled from Boston down to the Carolinas, earning money by teaching and lecturing whenever they could. And after 2 years, the plan was made, and Uriah, the younger of the two, sailed back to England to gather the parents and his 5 unwedded sisters in order to escort them to upstate New York to the town of Hyde Park on the Hudson River. William and Uriah attended 2 years of lectures in medicine at the College of Physicians and Surgeons at the New York Hospital, which is now part of Columbia University, and received their diplomas on February 28, 1834, upon which they entered an apprenticeship under the supervision of a physician in Albany. This is also where the entire family moved to establish a homestead, which would allow the 2 new physicians to head west. Once the farm was ready and the apprenticeship completed, the newly minted doctors organized their travel west to the Michigan Territory. There. Did I go? I may have gone 1 too many.
The middle button will go back. There you go.
This happens to be an acceptance and a diploma on the same page. Oh. This screen is doing something that screen's not doing. Okay. And we are?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So maybe you need to look at it.
And this is the license that Dr. Uriah was issued in the Michigan Territories.
So Don, what I would do, go back, and I think you need to look at the screen on the front. Yeah.
It might have jumped.
So I think the screen up there is what you're seeing on Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay.
Keyboard's down below, Bill.
So the Michigan Territory, I'll say, was attractive to them because of the rich, fertile lands that they were used to working, and they knew that they were going to have to be able to work land in order to, 1, develop medicines, 2, to provide sustenance for the family, and they also knew that the state was in a position where it could anticipate, or the territory was in a position where it could imagine becoming a state. And that, in fact, happened in 1837. But the stories of these 2 gentlemen really are very rich. William married and established his residence in Hastings, and both William and Uriah were highly regarded for physicians. Their patient visits required oftentimes a lot of travel because ill patients couldn't travel to them. And so they would travel by horseback and at times consume most of their day in order to see patients. Uriah married the daughter of a pharmacist, and they established their residence in the village of Richland. This house currently exists in the village of Richland, and is where Uriah and Maria lived, and is in fact the birthplace of W.E. Upjohn. It's no longer painted white, it's actually painted yellow. So if you drive through Richland Village just to the south, you'll see it on the west side.
Is that on D Avenue, John?
It's not the avenue.
Okay.
No, it's on 32nd Street. Many of the children, I should say, I didn't mention that. Maria gave birth to 12 children. Wow. Yeah. One died in infancy. The 9th child was W.E., William Raffles, and the founder of the Institute. And many of the children, though, were educated in Ann Arbor. In fact, so many that Uriah and Maria rented a house for the kids to occupy. And with so many children out of the house, I think they were 7 or 8 at this point, out of the house, but still needing support, the parents moved down to Galesburg, which was near the railroad tracks. And they could put supplies onto the train to send them to Ann Arbor to provide, food, clothing, what have you, whatever supplies they needed. And but by the time W.E. went to Ann Arbor, they no longer had the house. So he roomed with another cousin who was also going to attend the medical school. And I have a picture of our founder, W.E., on the right-hand side. And that's a shot of the first medical school at the University of Michigan, taken in 1850. The next slide shows that this is a group photo of the graduating class from 1870 in the School of Pharmacy. There are 2 women on there, Amelia Upjohn and Mary Upjohn, the first 2 females to graduate from the pharmacy school at the University of Michigan. Following W.E.'s and his cousin's graduation, they moved to Hastings and to complete a preceptorship under the supervision of Uncle William, so the older of the 2 brothers. And here is a picture of William's office as displayed in the house that William and his wife lived in Hastings. It's now been moved out to Charlton Park in Hastings. But there's a depiction of the office, the doctor's office. And by the time they had arrived for their preceptorship, they graduated in 1875. By the time they arrived, William, in addition to his practice, had been a member of the University of Michigan Board of Regents and was instrumental in establishing the medical school at Ann Arbor, and had served in the Army during the Civil War, in which he rose to become Surgeon-in-Chief of the 1st Brigade, 1st Division, cavalry of the Army of the Potomac. And he was with Kilpatrick in his raid on Richmond and with Sherman on his raid up the James River. He was a very accomplished and respected physician. W.E. and his cousin, who are now up in Hastings, W.E. married Rachel Babcock, who then also moved up to Hastings and during that preceptorship. And I think their first 2 or 3 children were born up there. And during that preceptorship is when Dr. Upjohn became very concerned about the poor conditions of the medicines that he was able to prescribe and provide to his patients. He knew that his patients were not dissolving the medicines after they ingested them. He was driven to find a better way to make medicines in order to provide more patients with the effective medicines that they were seeking. And after months of experimentation, using many devices and materials to create a more effective medicine, he developed a consistent, repeatable process to manufacture pills that could be stored and transported without an early decline in their integrity. This became known as the friable pill. And this is an elegant presentation of the friable pill at the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893, that great Columbia exposition that was put on the waterfront of Chicago. And as I had mentioned, the friable pill could be demonstrated, was demonstrated to be crushable under a thumb. And this was actually part of the logo of the Upjohn friable pill company. And previously, medicines of the day would harden into stone-like substances that could be literally be pounded into a soft pine board with a hammer without crumbling. And the friable pill could be crushed under a thumb and was easily absorbed without any crushing. Well, needless to say, this became a very popular medicine, and the company became quite successful, selling medicines around the world. And Dr. Upjohn's success allowed him more time for reading and studying new treatments. This depiction is him at his beloved Brook Lodge out in Augusta, which was a retreat for the family in the summertime. And also his beloved peonies, where he had acres and acres of peonies out in Augusta. But retirement wasn't to last long for Dr. Upjohn. Tragically, his son, who was chosen to be his successor, William Harold Upjohn, died very suddenly following surgery. He had died of a post-operative embolism, and it was crushing to the whole family. Harold had been groomed to be Dr. Upjohn's successor, and in a few years before that, Dr. Upjohn had lost his first wife and the mother of their children, and he certainly mourned her loss the rest of his life. But 8 years later, after Rachel's death, Dr. Upjohn did remarry, and he remarried the widow next door. Carrie Upjohn had lost her husband, James R. Gilmore, in 1908. And in 1913, W.E. and Carrie combined their families. And here is the depiction, a picture of Donald and Genevieve Upjohn. So a son from Carrie, a daughter from WE, they too fell in love. They too got married. And it was a very special and happy marriage. They often quipped how they each married their sibling. And, but their marriage resulted in 3 children, actually 4. One died at a young age. But all the girls that survived share the DNA of both the Upjohn and the Gilmore families. Quite a merger of Kalamazoo families. And here, of course, we may recognize a few houses from the hood, right? We have the Upjohn house is the Italianate style, and the Gilmore house as the Tudor style home here. And just to add more intrigue, the Butterman house, right? One of Donald and Genevieve's, I'm going to go back, Donald and Genevieve's daughter married into the Butterman family. So things were friendly. So. Okay, but let's return to our founder. He obviously was an extraordinary man, a very successful businessman, very successful physician, very, very successful pharmacist, man of many interests. And it really is a background, family background, a personal background that prepared him very well for his life of invention and perseverance. He cared deeply for his fellow man and applied his skills and talents to make his patients better, his community better, and of course, his family better. His death brought forth his great idea of this institute. And the allocation of shares in the Upjohn Company to fund the pursuit of solutions to prevent future depressions from causing such despair and misfortune. He was able to solve his successor issue by hiring Donald Gilmore. You know, the stepson who had married his daughter, making him his son-in-law. Donald had a long and distinguished career at Upjohn, and upon his retirement, Ted Parfet was put at the helm of the company. And you can see their positioning on the genealogy chart in front of you. But I guess I want to conclude my remarks today by expressing my appreciation for all that has been achieved here at the Institute. You can only imagine the effort, the thought that went into really organizing around what was written in the will, you know, a wish, an aspiration, a desire. You can only imagine the thought that went into it. But when you think about what has resulted, and you all are a part of this, it's been just tremendous. And each of you are making a difference every day in the lives of so many of our citizens. And I thank you for that. And I believe Dr. Upjohn would be proud. So thank you very much for the time this morning or this afternoon, right, and for welcoming me here to the Institute. Yeah.
Ben, why don't you stay there? I'll just share the screen for a moment. We have plenty of time for questions, and if you're on Zoom, if you could put your questions in the chat, Laura, our Zoom Meister, will be communicating the questions back to us. But Don, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Steve?
I was wondering, when did the Upjohn building in University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, when did that what date or when that starts?
So you're speaking of a specific building, right?
It's all
Yeah,
it's like the Upjohn building.
yeah, yeah. So that was after his death.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know the exact date of it, but
Okay.
that was after his death, and a number of family members contributed to that. Yeah, but there's also newer building, the Rachel Upjohn building for mental illness. And what wasn't widely known was that Dr. Upjohn's first wife, Rachel, suffered from mental illness. And there are members of the family that have suffered also. And one of those members underwrote that gift to the university in her honor.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Elizabeth?
What was the first medicine that the friable pill was
Yeah.
used on?
That's a great question. And
Excuse me, we need to repeat the question for the Zoom audience. So the question, just for everyone that's on virtual, is what was the first medicine that was used with the friable pill?
so remember, medicines of those days were really from the garden, right? Or from plants, roots, and things like that. No one really knows what the first one was. In fact, there were probably 4 or 5, right? So there were herbs that were crushed in this fashion and roots that were crushed in that fashion, so on and so forth. No one really knows what the first one was that I've ever seen. Please.
Brian? And we'll repeat Brian's question.
Yeah.
Did W.E. ever publish any sort of memoir or sort of discuss what his sort of formative influences were? I think it's pretty interesting he had a physician father and a pharmacist mother. I mean, that's a pretty good combination for being a pharmaceutical innovator.
Yeah, so the question was, did he publish much about his personal memoirs and what his own inspirations were? Some of the best writings I've seen have to do with his work as the treasurer of the American Peony Society. And this is where he talked about how, as a man of his means and with a great curious mind, he had observed that modern production techniques had made it possible that men and women didn't have to work as hard as they did in the past to gain a sustenance, a meager existence. And this produced a lot of leisure time. And so he called upon his fellow citizens to use that leisure time very productively. And he used himself as an example to state that nothing was more satisfying. And he started to get a little off topic here about various ways of achieving satisfaction. And but he states in there that nothing was more satisfying than growing peonies. And he would expand upon the beauty of a peony plant. And it's really charming to read that. So thanks for the question.
Chris? Yes.
Could you talk, my understanding is that W.E.'s nephew Lawrence took over management of the trust when Dr. Upjohn died. Is that right? And could you talk a little bit about how that morphed from Lawrence's care into eventually the Institute in 1945?
Yeah, so I am so glad you asked that pertinent question. But I'm not the right one to answer that, okay? And I think it's worthy of more discussion. I will say that they struggled with it. And whether it was Allen, who was the mastermind around the ultimate solution, or it was a group, I tend to think it was more of a group that was assembled. and most likely, members of the senior executive ranks of the Upjohn Company.
Within the company.
Yeah.
People within the company.
Yeah, and, the Institute's, life really began, in 1945 or something.
Right.
Yeah, so, there was the trust who was doing things, whether it's out in the land, out in the farm, what have you, doing other things. But it wasn't until somebody came up with the sustainable idea of creating an institute that would study ways to do that. And I'm sure LN would have been at the table, but was he the guy? I
Was
don't know.
Lawrence an executive within the company?
Yes, he was. Yeah, yeah. So as I talked to you about the secession, yeah, so there was Lawrence, who was a nephew of W.E. and a physician. It was felt to be very important to have a physician there. But his title and role and what Donald's title and role were, you couldn't tell exactly who was in charge. But it seems Donald got whatever he wanted.
So there's a question on the chat, is that right? So let me get to that in a moment, but we have, go ahead and then,
Where are his papers? Are they here or are they at the university or, WE's kind of
Yeah.
personal records? and
Yeah,
whatnot?
so they're all over the place.
All over.
Yeah, yeah, and it depends if you mean his scientific notebooks
Yeah.
or do you mean his personal diary?
His personal
He-
diary,
he-
did he keep one?
He was not a good keeper of a personal diary, yeah. He was more interested in the science, yeah. And, yeah.
Michelle, and then we'll go to the chat.
Yeah, so I had a question, thank you for coming today, about the kind of legacy of the Upjohn family in Kalamazoo. We know the company is no longer with us. We know about the Upjohn Institute, but I always hear when I investigate various parts of the community, like, oh, the community foundation started with Upjohn stock and other philanthropic organizations in the community. You can tie many of them back, and many of the companies as well that are here, some of the smaller companies can be tied back to the Upjohn company. And so from where you sit, could you just offer a few words on what you see as the legacy of the Upjohn company and the Upjohn family for the community? I know it's kind of a big topic.
So for those on Zoom, the short version of the question is
Legacy
to discuss the legacy of the Upjohn family
for
in terms of Kalamazoo and just charitable kinds of foundations.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I will say, the legacy always begins with that guy, right? And what I am impressed with is that there is so much that led to the creation, the formation, the development of that guy, right? Then I would say that the next part of the legacy really is whether it's LN, whether it's Donald Gilmore, whether it's Gifford Upjohn, the roles that those men played at the Upjohn Company were really significant. And think about Donald Gilmore. I mean, he was the son of a dry goodsman, right? They had a department store on Burdick Street. And Kathy, I think you even had some time there. And but WE saw something else in Donald and said, "Come to the Upjohn Company. I need you." And he did, and he was enormously successful there. And I think of what LN did in medical education, very successful in that. So, and in many respects, there are still a lot of family members around this town, and the legacy is still being written, right? And there's just something magical about having this kind of history and this kind of maybe family around to, keep people motivated and inspired. Makes it nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Laura, we have a question from the chat.
It's Brian Patelko asks, he has a great respect for Dr. Upjohn's other contributions to the community, such as the city charter and civic theater, WMU, etc. Is that a topic for a future discussion?
Sure. Yeah, no, and I would say that when you get into his legacy, right? I think it was the Kalamazoo Gazette that declared him citizen of the century. I mean, how many people have been named citizen of a century? Oh my God. And it's a beautiful tribute that they composed of him. So,
Don?
Don, I've got a personal question.
good.
I've heard you make this statement. I saw, the first time I saw it was on the video about Dr. Upjohn's life and the connection to the Institute. And I've also heard you make this statement in personal conversation. And that's, the statement of the belief within the Upjohn family and the legacy of giving back to the community as it was, portrayed in Dr. Upjohn's life. How is that communicated? And, when you think of that commitment from individuals within the Upjohn family, where does that come from? How is that communicated? I'm just really interested in that.
Well, two things. It probably isn't very well communicated, but it's actions, right? And it's just a demonstration of willingness and desire to help others. So by actions.
Kathy?
So I wanted to mention, it was kind of mentioned by Don, but if the people in this room have not watched the video that's on the Institute website, I highly encourage them to do that because it really does talk about the philanthropic part of Dr. Upjohn and how he had his hands in everything in the community, but he was like on the back burner. He wasn't out there tooting his horn, he was quietly investing in everything and helping things grow.
Yeah, thank you for that. And when you watch that video, you do gain a much bigger perspective for the quality of the man. And that's particularly well done.
I remember when we made that and, had this big anniversary celebration and
Yeah, that
that
was
pretty neat.
was that the 75th or what was that? Yeah, that was time for another one.
It is.
Good idea. Any other questions on the chat or any other questions from? No? Well, thank you again.